My father's wife wasn't just smiling at our anniversary celebration, she was running a criminal network right under his nose. And I was the only one in the room who. It started with an invitation I almost threw away. A golden card from the man who'd spent years introducing me as someone who does small consulting work, never acknowledging the career I'd built protecting people from risks they didn't see coming. I hadn't planned to go. But something, maybe stubbornness, maybe the hope for a truce, made me step into that glittering resort ballroom. What I didn't know was that the night wasn't just about to challenge my patience. It was going to force me to choose between letting my father fall victim to the perfect con, or tearing his carefully constructed world apart in front of hundreds of people. Stay until the end, because the way it ended wasn't just justice. It was the kind of truth that rewrites years of silence. This is ErasedMe. Subscribe now, so you don't miss the stories people wish would stay buried. I was halfway through brewing my morning coffee when the doorbell rang, 3 sharp chimes, too precise for a neighbor. Outside, the spring air carried that faint metallic scent it gets before a storm, even though the sky was cloudless. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope on my doorstep would pull me back into a life I'd spent decades untangling from. It was thick, cream-colored, with my name written in looping gold script. No return address. I didn't need to open it to guess who it was from. My father had a way of making his presence felt without ever picking up the phone. Sure enough, the card inside read: Jonathan Turner and Evelyn Carter request the honor of your presence. A wedding anniversary celebration. Their second. At the Rosewater Resort in Florida, beachfront, 5-star, dripping in money I had nothing to do with. I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the embossed letters. My father hadn't spoken to me in months, unless you counted that Christmas brunch where he told a room full of strangers I dabbled in insurance stuff, instead of acknowledging 20 years in high-level risk analysis. So why now? Why this? The truth was, Jonathan Turner had never wanted a daughter who thought for herself. I was supposed to inherit his network, his ambitions, his way of measuring worth in champagne toasts and stock portfolios. Instead, I'd built a life he couldn't brag about in country clubs. Still, I didn't throw the invitation away. I should have. God, I should have. Because if I had, maybe I wouldn't have walked straight into the kind of trap only family can set. I set the invitation on the counter, but it felt like it was still staring at me. The gold lettering looked harmless enough, yet something about it made my skin tighten, like hearing a familiar voice in the dark when you know you're alone. I tried to distract myself, cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Florida, to my father, to Evelyn. I'd only met her twice, both times at events where the air was thick with perfume and polite laughter, the kind where people touch your arm while scanning the room for someone more important. She had a smile that never quite reached her eyes. My mind replayed the last time I'd seen my father. We were standing in a marble lobby in Boston, the winter wind pushing in through the revolving door. He'd just introduced me to an investor friend as Maggie. She used to work in insurance, now she consults on small stuff. I remember his hand brushing invisible lint off his sleeve, like even the words he'd used to describe me had left a residue. And yet, the longer I stared at the invitation, the more I noticed what wasn't there. No personal note. No, hope you can make it, love Dad. Just a printed card, sent like a corporate memo. The RSVP deadline was unusually close, less than a week. Almost like they needed me to decide quickly, before I had time to think. That was when I felt it. The slow, creeping certainty that this wasn't just another social obligation. My father didn't reach out unless he wanted something. Evelyn didn't smile unless she was winning. And maybe, just maybe, the cracks in our family weren't just emotional, they were the kind you could fall into if you weren't careful. The Rosewater Resort's lobby smelled faintly of saltwater and polished wood, the kind of luxury that's meant to put you at ease. It didn't work on me. My heels clicked across the marble as I scanned the room, already rehearsing the polite but distant tone I'd use with my father. I spotted him before he saw me, tall, silver hair perfectly in place, a linen blazer that probably cost more than my entire travel budget. Evelyn was beside him, draped in cream silk, her fingers looped loosely through his arm like she'd been born to stand in expensive lobbies. "Maggie," he said, when his eyes finally landed on me. No hug, no warmth, just my name, flat. He kissed my cheek the way you'd greet an acquaintance at a charity auction. Evelyn's smile was a perfect half-moon. "So glad you could make it," she said, her voice smooth as glass. But her gaze flicked past me almost instantly, tracking someone else across the room. Then it started. The introductions. One by one, my father guided me to his circle of friends, board members, donors, people with practiced handshakes and glances that cataloged your worth in 3 seconds. "This is my daughter, Maggie," he said to a silver-haired man in a bespoke suit. "She used to work in insurance, now she does consulting." That word again, the one that stripped away 20 years of experience, like my career was a hobby I picked up between errands. By the 4th introduction, I caught a whisper from behind me. A woman in a navy dress leaned toward her companion. With her father's connections, she could be anything. Why settle for that? I felt my jaw tighten, the heat crawling up my neck. I forced a smile, the kind that hid every sharp edge of my thoughts. But the more I looked around, the more I noticed it, people exchanging glances when I passed, conversations dipping into silence. It wasn't just judgment. It was curiosity. Like they already knew something about me I didn't know yet. And when I saw the way Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she watched me from across the room, one question cut through the noise in my head. What exactly have they been telling people about me? By the time the welcome dinner ended, I felt like I'd been walking through a glass room, seen from every angle, but never invited in. Conversations swirled around me without ever landing my way. When people did speak to me, their questions were too polite, too rehearsed, like they were checking a box before moving on. I slipped out to the terrace for air. The ocean was only a black silhouette against the night sky, the steady pulse of the waves almost drowning out the murmur of voices inside. Almost. Through the glass doors, I caught sight of my father laughing, really laughing, with a group of men I didn't recognize. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen that version of him aimed in my direction. It wasn't just distance I felt. It was exclusion. Deliberate. Like my presence was an inconvenience everyone was too polite to say out loud. A memory surfaced uninvited, 15 years ago, at a charity gala in Boston. I'd shown up in a borrowed dress, proud to be my father's guest, until he introduced me to a business partner as, still figuring out what she wants to do. I'd already been 3 years into my investigative work by then. That same chill, being reduced to nothing, was back now, crawling along my skin. Inside, Evelyn was speaking to a couple I'd been introduced to earlier. The woman glanced at me over her shoulder, then whispered something that made Evelyn smile, not the public smile, but a smaller, sharper one. Something was off. It wasn't just the usual condescension. This felt coordinated. The glances, the silences, the way Evelyn's hand lingered on my father's arm when she saw me looking. As I turned back toward the ocean, one thought solidified, heavy and certain. This wasn't just a celebration. It was a stage, and I had no idea what part they'd cast me in. I was about to retreat to my room when a faint click caught my attention, the sound of a side door closing. It wasn't the main entrance, and it wasn't meant for guests. Years in risk analysis had trained my ears to file away those tiny anomalies, the ones most people forget the second they hear them. I followed, moving through a hallway lined with framed photos of the resort's founders. The hum of the dinner crowd faded behind me, replaced by the softer, less polished sounds of staff at work. Through a half-open service door, I spotted a man in a tailored suit standing too comfortably in the staff area, speaking to a catering worker. Only, that wasn't a catering worker. The posture was wrong. The shoes were wrong. And then, when he shifted his stance, I saw it, the faint outline of an earpiece curling behind his ear. I didn't step closer. I didn't need to. I recognized the man instantly. 3 years ago, his name had come up in a fraud investigation I'd been consulted on. A job that had quietly vanished from my desk after the client decided not to pursue legal action. He was part of an operation that infiltrated high-net-worth events, collecting more than just jewelry, bank logins, signatures, corporate access codes. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. The earpiece man murmured something about timing it with the toast and getting the last confirmations from her. That single word, her, landed like a stone in my gut. Back in the dining hall, I scanned the crowd until my gaze found Evelyn. She was standing alone near the bar, her phone in hand, face lit by the screen. When she noticed me looking, she didn't smile. She didn't look away. And in that moment, I knew. She wasn't just part of the guest list, she was the connection. The reason this crew was here. The reason the timeline was so tight. The celebration wasn't the real event. It was the cover. I didn't go back to the dining hall right away. Instead, I found myself in a narrow corridor between the service wing and the guest suites, leaning against the cool plaster wall, trying to steady my breathing. Evelyn. The name echoed in my head like a warning siren I'd ignored for too long. I replayed every interaction we'd had, her too perfect politeness, the way she always positioned herself between my father and me, how she'd never once asked about my work. And now I understood why. She'd already known. Known exactly what I could do, and what I might notice if I looked too closely. It wasn't just betrayal. It was precision. She hadn't needed to push me out of my father's life entirely, just far enough to make sure I wouldn't be trusted if I ever tried to warn him. And I'd made it easy. I'd let years of cold introductions and clipped phone calls convince me to stay away. Somewhere down the hall, muted laughter floated from the ballroom. I wondered how many of those guests were her marks, how many would leave tomorrow lighter by more than just a hangover. And then the heavier thought landed, how many were in on it. The trap wasn't only for them. It was for me, too. If I spoke up now, it would look like bitterness. Like the estranged daughter stirring trouble at her father's perfect celebration. Evelyn wouldn't even have to defend herself, my father's silence would do that for her. That's when I heard a voice behind me. Still spotting trouble where no one else sees it? I turned. It was David Brooks, old colleague, someone I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. His smile was thin, but his eyes told me he knew exactly what I'd stumbled into. And that he'd been waiting for me to find it. David's presence hit me like a memory I hadn't decided if I wanted back. We'd worked together on cases years ago, him in field ops, me in analysis. If he was here, it wasn't for the free champagne. You're not imagining it, he said quietly, steering me toward a less crowded hallway. And you're not the only one watching them. My pulse ticked up. Them? He glanced over his shoulder before answering. Evelyn's not just playing hostess. She's a facilitator. I've been tracking her crew for 6 months. They embed in high-profile events, build trust, then harvest everything from jewelry to offshore account logins. She's the one who handpicks the marks. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to hear it laid out, crisp and undeniable. You have proof? I asked. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside were high-resolution photographs. Evelyn at other galas, leaning in close to different wealthy men and women, always the same small smile, always the same body language. In the corner of each shot was a different member of the crew I'd just seen tonight. The photos were damning, but what stopped me cold was the last one, Evelyn, seated at a cafe in Miami, across from my father. The date stamp was 3 weeks before they announced this anniversary event. Between them on the table lay a thin leather folder, the kind you'd use for contracts. David lowered his voice. She's already moved a sizable portion of his portfolio. He doesn't even know. For a moment, all I heard was the faint music from the ballroom bleeding into the hall. My father, stubborn, arrogant, blind, wasn't just a target. He was the anchor that would sink me, too, if I didn't act. A strange calm settled over me. The kind I used to get right before a critical briefing, where fear burned off and only the plan remained. I'm going to need more than photos, I said. David's mouth curved into a grim half-smile. I figured you'd say that. There's a call scheduled for tonight, private line. She'll be confirming the transfer with her people. We get that recording, and there's no way she walks out of here clean. Somewhere inside me, the years of cold shoulders and clipped introductions hardened into something sharper. They'd underestimated me for the last time. David and I didn't shake on it. We didn't need to. The look in his eyes told me he'd already decided we were in this together, whether my father knew it or not. We slipped back into the edges of the ballroom, blending in with the polite laughter and clinking glasses. On the surface, I was just another guest with a champagne flute. Underneath, I was counting exits, clocking security placement, and noting every movement Evelyn made. She moved like a dancer, never in one place too long, always with a hand on someone's arm. I knew the call David mentioned would be my only window. The proof had to be airtight, something even my father's stubborn pride couldn't wave away. I started small, a few photos from my phone, discreet notes about who she spoke to and for how long. There's a rhythm to a con. If you listen closely, you can hear it. The build-up, the distraction, the moment the mark's attention shifts. Evelyn was already in that rhythm, weaving the night toward her closing act. David brushed past me near the bar, murmuring just low enough for me to hear, 11:45. South Wing. She won't see you coming. I thought of something my first mentor told me, the best counterstrike isn't loud, it's the one they never feel until it's too late. The night outside the resort's glass walls was thick and black, the kind of darkness that made your reflection look like someone else staring back at you. In mine, I saw not the estranged daughter my father barely acknowledged, but the woman who'd spent her life learning to see what others missed. And tonight, Evelyn Carter was about to learn what it felt like to be seen. At 11:40, I was already in the south wing. The hallway was long and carpeted, muffling every step. A single lamp threw pale light across the corridor, making the rest feel like the mouth of a tunnel. David was waiting near the service stairs, phone in hand. She's in the study, he murmured. Doors cracked. Audio's running. I moved past him, slow and measured. Through the gap, I could see Evelyn at a desk, her back to the door, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, but the words were sharp, precise, numbers, names, account codes. She read them like poetry she'd memorized. On the desk sat a leather folder, the same one from the Miami photo. I stepped inside, letting the door close without a sound. David's recorder caught everything as Evelyn confirmed the final transfer. She never turned around, she didn't even know I was there until I spoke. You might want to hang up before you incriminate yourself further. Her head snapped up. In the pause that followed, I could hear her breathing. No shouting, no denial, just a narrowing of the eyes as she assessed the situation. You don't understand what you're walking into, she said. Oh, I do, I replied, sliding the folder toward me. Inside were contracts, signatures, some in my father's hand, some forged. Enough to bury her twice over. She reached for her phone again, but David stepped in from the hall, blocking her path. The three of us stood in that room, the only sound the faint hum of the desk lamp. It wasn't a standoff, it was checkmate, and we all knew it. From somewhere deeper in the resort came the muffled sound of music ending. Guests would be filtering toward the lounge soon. Timing mattered. I gathered the papers and handed David the recorder. Call them. 2 minutes later, plainclothes officers were in the room. No shouting, no drawn guns, just calm, efficient movements as they took her phone, her folder, her composure. Evelyn didn't fight. She just watched me, eyes steady, like she was memorizing the shape of her defeat. When they let her out, the corridor seemed to breathe again. I stayed behind for a moment, looking at the desk, at the small glass of champagne she'd left untouched. Back in the lounge, the celebration had stalled. My father stood near the bar, confusion and whispers swirling around him. Evelyn was gone. The police were discreet, but people noticed. They always notice. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't explain. I just walked up to my father and handed him the folder. "Read it," I said quietly. And as he opened it, his face shifting with each page, I realized the real victory wasn't in proving Evelyn guilty. It was in finally being impossible to dismiss. My father didn't speak for a long time. He just stood there, the leather folder open in his hands, eyes scanning each page as if the ink itself might rearrange into something less devastating. It didn't. When he finally looked up, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "You saved me." I shook my head. "No. I saved the truth. What you do with it now, that's on you." We stepped outside, away from the thinning crowd, onto the terrace where the ocean whispered against the shore. The night air was sharp, briny, almost cleansing. He leaned on the railing, shoulders heavy, as if seeing his life from a higher vantage point for the first time. "I thought I knew people," he said. "Evelyn, she was careful. But you saw her." I almost laughed, but it came out brittle. "That's what I do, Dad. I see what others miss. You just never asked me to." He turned, and for the first time in years, there was no defensiveness in his eyes, only weariness and something I dared to think might be respect. "I've been wrong about you for a long time." The words should have landed like a victory. Instead, they felt like a door creaking open after years of rust. Welcome, but slow. Fragile. In the weeks that followed, we spoke more than we had in the past decade. Not every call was warm, not every conversation easy. But he listened. And for me, that was new. Evelyn's arrest made headlines for a week, then faded, just another scandal in the endless churn. The difference was, my father kept the folder on his desk. A reminder, maybe, of the night he realized the daughter he'd underestimated could be the one thing standing between him and ruin. I'd like to say we rebuilt everything, but the truth is, some cracks never close completely. What changes is how you live with them, whether you see them as flaws, or proof the structure survived the pressure. One evening, months later, he asked me to dinner. No agenda, no audience. Just us. Halfway through the meal, he said, "You make people safer. You make me safer." And in that moment, I realized something. Being seen doesn't erase the years you were invisible. But sometimes, it's enough to light the path ahead. Some nights, when the world is quiet, I think about that folder on my father's desk. Not the papers themselves, they've long since been locked away, but the way it sits there, visible, a silent reminder of a night that changed everything. We like to imagine that justice is about grand gestures, police sirens, courtrooms, public apologies. But in truth, it's often quieter. It's the moment someone finally listens when they've spent years dismissing you. It's the space that opens up when truth replaces assumption. I didn't expose Evelyn to prove myself. I did it because it was right, because someone was in danger, and because I could. But in doing so, I learned something I wish I'd understood years ago. Recognition is a gift, not a guarantee. You can spend your whole life waiting for it, or you can keep building your life without it, and be ready when it finally comes. My father and I will never get back the years we lost. There are still gaps in our conversations, still moments when old habits creep in. But now there's also the memory of him standing on that terrace, the ocean behind us, and admitting, without defense, that he'd been wrong. That moment didn't fix everything. But it gave us something to build on. And maybe that's all reconciliation really is, not erasing the cracks, but learning how to stand together despite them. Because in the end, the people who truly see you, don't just watch from the sidelines. They stand beside you, even if it took them a lifetime to find their place there.